Hi friends, I'm excited to finally dive into Sonia G's newest release. From her Tradition series, we have the Keyaki Kakishibu face brushes. I don't know about you, but the minute the Keyaki Kakishibu eye set released, I quickly envisioned a face set version of those eye brushes, and you could not believe how excited I was. I commented under the announcement post, seeing that we are getting Kakishibu dyed face brushes from Sonia. Now, if it's your first time encountering one of my videos, hi, I love reviewing Japanese made brushes, especially those created by Sonia G, and we're gonna go over the pricing and all of that, but I wanted to cover a few details about Japanese made brushes. You will see that they are expensive, very much so. These brushes are handmade. Not only are the bristles hand bundled, but not even considering the premium grade for the goat hair, Saikoho Kakishibu dyed goat hair in all three brushes, hand bundled, hand dyed. The process through which these brushes are created are arduous, detailed, and highly artistic. You are getting an artisanal tool, and because of that, the price tag will be high. Given that, these brushes are currently available on Beautylish, and before I go any further, a huge thank you to Sonia and Beautylish for sending this set as complimentary. I am grateful for the gift and just was excited to have received the email notification letting me know that they were on their way. And we have them here. We'll go over the pricing and the details, but as I was saying, these brushes are currently available exclusively on Beautylish, sold as a set but individually. The Traditions TF1 retails for $130, Traditions TF2 retails for $75, Traditions TF3 $67, and the entire set is $272. Again, if it's your first time hearing about Sonia G, hearing about Japanese made brushes, you see the price and you're like, oh my goodness. I would also highly recommend that you visit Sonia's website, sweetmakeuptemptations.com, where she outlines comprehensively why this set is expensive, the process and everything that goes into it, to provide more insight if you were still questioning why these are so expensive. The way Sonia breaks everything down, I think in a convincing manner, will give you perspective as to why these brushes cost what they do and the reason why she chose these materials and these shapes specifically. I'll go through each brush one by one. We'll take a look at the brushes, and why don't I input that footage now? Here are the brushes fresh out of the package, unwashed, and here are the brushes post-wash. You can see, or recognize rather, how important it is to wash your new brush so it can fully bloom, so you could see its true shape, and also important for you to do before using the brush, because you want the bristles to flare out in the way that they were intended to function as, and that is going to also deliver a much better makeup application result. Let's begin with the Traditions Face 1, and thank you to Sonia for outlining these details on her IG post, which I am more than happy to also link down below. The Traditions Face 1 was designed for the application of powders or bronzers when we prefer to use a more fluffy and airy brush for a more natural, lightweight application. While it's quite huge, thanks to its shape, we can still have control on where we want the application to be more emphasized, play with the sides, the surface, or even the edges. Listen, when I first saw my beloved T6 from the Kakishibu eye set, I immediately envisioned, how would it be? A brush that was designed just like this, but bigger. You see, this little guy is basically a replication, but 5 times its size. I immediately went to, as you'll see here in the footage, I dove into my YSL bronzer, and once I saw the size of the TF1, I immediately thought bronzer. Now, funny, I have not been wearing loose powders as of late, but the way this TF1 brush fluffs around my face, it completely envelops it, and actually a beautiful alternative experience to a larger powder brush. I'm thinking Bobodo Shikohodo's collaboration brush, the Hour one. That is a huge brush, but because of the way its design is quite different, whereas the TF1, it's more like a paddle fluffy brush. And I have Sonia's Jumbo Bronzer here as a comparison because I immediately thought of this brush. The Jumbo Bronzer is a lot more direct. It doesn't have the same fluff and splay as the TF1 possesses. So if you already have Jumbo Bronzer, you can get a similar experience, although I would exclusively use this for bronzer just because of its more controlled design or more controlled brush head. There's not a lot of splay. If you want a little more splay from a brush that wasn't necessarily round or round flat, this is a joy to use. It's just completely different from what I have in my collection, and I was delightfully surprised to see this shape enter the face category for Sonia G brushes. Again, as you saw with the bronzer, it just applied it beautifully. You could stamp on because the brush is so fluffy that the bristles will naturally place the powder on the skin evenly and smoothly. Or as you saw, I whipped it around in a circular fashion and I did more of like the pat down motion around the perimeter of my forehead. And again, you most certainly, my goodness, this will be ideal for loose powder application in a lightweight fashion. It won't pick up so much product, although I would air out the bristles first before you go into the loose powder. Pour the powder into the lid of the compact, swoosh your brush around thoroughly, ensuring that the product is evenly distributed throughout the bristles so you don't get those heavy doses of powder randomly on your face, but rather you get an even, just lightweight distribution of product all over to set your foundation with. Or I don't remember Sonia mentioning this, my apologies, I did not read all of her material in regards to this new face set, but I can only imagine how one would be successful with mineral powder application. Also with powder foundation, perhaps you like to use powder foundation as your last step in complexion, not only to provide a little more coverage, but holding power. This, I think, will apply in a more lightweight fashion than a denser brush would. So just something else to consider application wise. I also went in with Addiction Tokyo's Emotive Nude because I do remember reading on one of Sonia's posts, specifically the one speaking about TF1, is that you can use TF1 for blush application, albeit it'll be very much blown out, but you probably are thinking of those more neutral colored blushes in your collection that don't pour on so much intensity on the first dose, on the first blend, right? That's why I took a ride with Emotive Nude, because it was more like a softer, nude-ish, beige-ish, champagne-y experience on my cheeks. And I'm thinking also New Venus from Pat's Divine Blush collection, and a few Suku blushes that I have that are lighter in color, but because of the fluffiness of TF1, I most certainly can throw on those shades in a more, not haphazard, that is not the word, in a more free-form fashion that is not going to appear too low or too high, but just place the blush where I need it. But because the color itself is not as intense, it will work out just fine. And I think also the design of the brush just makes it beautiful to maneuver around the face easily. And you're like, are they soft? I go into these videos assuming that you know, but shame on me, that is a terrible assumption to make. These brushes are incredibly soft. Now, comparatively, they will not feel as silky as Gray Squirrel or Red Canadian Squirrel or Silver Fox Hair. And also the dye does affect the feel overall of Psycho Ho Goat. So it won't be as soft as, for instance, Abiko Ho, that is like a higher premium goat hair bristle, and the other examples that I just mentioned is still soft, however. But if you have her Kakishibu set, if you have any of her Psycho Ho Goat brushes from her Fundamental series or from her previously released face brushes, that's around ballpark the soft experience you will feel, just for context. Next, we have the Traditions Face 2. Was designed for the application of blush, bronzer, soft contour, gentle buffing to work with loose and pressed powders. It can be used with very gentle pressure or with more determination for more power and buffing abilities. This is your multifunction brush. If you were to choose one, I would recommend TF2 just from what Sonia outlined in terms of how many roles it can cover. It can apply your blush, your bronzer, maybe, perhaps not highlighter, but if you were to apply some powder highlighter here on the edge, you could just lightly tap and then buff to smooth. I would probably recommend the TF3 for highlighting, but we'll get there in a minute. And I also have her Fundamental Soft Buffer on standby to compare. Sonia mentioned how she loves these super round ball types of blush brushes because they have beautiful movement on the skin, and I think an appropriate splay to cover enough surface area where you're not there all day, especially if you choose one brush and you use the TF1, or excuse me, the TF2 to apply loose powder all over to set your foundation with. If you wanted to apply bronzer in a blown out fashion that you would get from the TF1, you most certainly can maneuver that powder around the hollows of your cheeks in a way that can replicate that finish. As you saw, I went in with the YSL bronzer again in a more concentrated fashion here into the hollows if you wanted to create more of that intensity there in the cheekbone area. And I could imagine if you have a contour powder that leans more neutral cool, you can use the TF2 to create that blend. And blush, my goodness, I went in with Addiction Tokyo Smoked Paprika. Okay, what a beautiful shade. And I love to apply blush in this circular fashion. I think it naturally just spreads the product in the way that leaves the cheeks appearing flushed. And of course, if you wanted your blush to appear in a more concentrated fashion, more sculpted, then you would just keep that color higher in the cheekbone area. And then after everything's been applied, you could take the TF2 around for a ride, ensuring that all the edges are smooth and blurred. Everything appears polished and finished on the skin. And this is what I love buffing for. Now, you could argue you could use TF1 for some serious buffing and polishing, but if I were to compare this with the Niji Pro, which, you know what, let me get Miss Niji Pro. You can see that the Niji Pro has a more pronounced point and crimp on the ferrule. The bristles are much shorter, which lends to a firmer, stronger feel on the skin, a lot more polish, and I think more appropriate for formulas that are gelée textured, that are hard in the pan. I'm thinking those huge Tom Ford bronzer palettes. Remember those with the big bronzer pan, but they were baked? This is the type of brush you would use on that type of formula, where the TF2 I think more appropriate for softer powders like you saw there here in the demo using the YSL bronzer. And my apologies, I brought this brush out because if you were thinking about her limited edition Hinoki brush set 1 out of 2, this is still a little different from TF1. You can see it's smaller, the ferrule design. This is more curved, whereas the Hinoki brush is more pointed and a little bit more crimp there on the tip of the ferrule. So this is similar, right? And I do have a review covering the Hinoki brush. It's fluffy, but it doesn't have the same fluff as the TF1. This is a lot more spread, a lot more blown out in feel. This is a lot more concentrated. So sure, you could have a similar experience with the Hinoki brush, but not quite the same. It's a little tighter. It doesn't have that same splay as you would feel with the TF1. I just wanted to put that out there. And back to the TF2, again, it's a much smaller brush, but hugely versatile. As you saw, you could be more concentrated with your bronzer or contour application, with your blush application. You could go hog wild with loose powder, for sure. And even mineral foundation, if you prefer a smaller brush, so you could pinpoint those areas that need more coverage. This brush is not so lightweight, but it's not so dense that it's going to apply too much makeup or too little makeup. It just hits right at the center. I think moderate coverage, but you have that control. You can dial up the coverage, especially if you wanted to concentrate on that area that needs it, or just take it around for a nice light buff. I go back and forth with what I prefer. I'm thinking about bronzer because I love using big brushes for that blown out finish with bronzer, but I can also appreciate a smaller medium-sized brush, still replicate that blown out finish, but it just having a little more control there. So really it depends. It depends on the mood, on the product. You know how that that goes. And lastly, we have the Traditions Phase 3, was designed to be used with setting powders and for precision work, but with some airiness for more ease in the movement, and also it offers more versatility with the products, whether it's blush, blush toppers, contour, or highlighter. Now, although I had awarded TF2 as my #1 multifunctional brush, TF3 definitely multifunctional. It's like a mini Inochige Pro. And we remember the Inochige Pro from her Face Pro series. And while we're at it, I got a few more examples to boot. Here is her classic Inochige Pro. Oh, this is terrible. It was leaning against the drawer. And I'm so sorry. You can see that there is that point on the tip of the brush, and compared to TF3, it's a lot smaller and not as round and blown out. I just adore the Inochige Pro, and now to have another Sonia G brush that mimics that similar shape with the more severe point, because I also remember Wayne's Artist series. If you remember, this is one of his best sets, especially just with the construction of the handle and the design of the brush head compared to Sonia's TF3. Wayne's brush is a little smaller, but you can see it's similar in design with that point at the tip, right? Round ferrule, point at the tip. And as Sonia explained, because of this shape, is a lot more airy, definitely compared to the TF2. TF2 is more round, more bristle, a little more density, not so much that you can't feel it move around well on the skin. TF3 is definitely going to have more fluidity there, especially with all the products that Sonia outlined with the loose powders. And I think also when I read on the post describing TF3 specifically that she loves to use this brush with loose blush powder. I don't have, actually, I never got into the Givenchy, and that's the only product that I'm thinking of with as loose blush. Listen, I know there are plenty of loose blush powders out there, but the Givenchy loose powder blush product is the standout one because I think it's just so iconic in terms of having the 4 different shades for the one color blush, you know what I'm saying? And in the demo, I used the TF3 to apply Sugu's blurring blush under the eyes because the point, okay? Under eye powdering, a cinch, not only under the eyes, but I just took TF3 between the brows and lightly placed that setting type powder, or I used it for setting. Okay, I know it's a blush, I get it. But just on the center of the face, and also if you wanted more of a air light blush brush to carefully place powder on those portions of your face that you need some setting but not so much. And then I went in with the Hourglass topper blushes because when Sonia had mentioned that TF3 was designed with blush toppers in mind, then I immediately thought of the more shimmer type blush toppers that I have. And the brush design definitely helps distribute that texture more evenly on the skin, especially if you wanted to use those types of products, but you felt that your blush brushes were too dense, it picked up too much product and therefore applied too much. TF3 is a lot more lightweight. And if you wanted more blush product on your face, then you just zigzag the brush across the pan to pick up more product, and naturally the various lens will cater to a stronger pickup, basically because of the different tier bristles that you have here. It's just going to grab that product a lot more than a rounder brush would. Like if you were to lay it completely flat, you'll have to take it directly on the pan, wiggle it, or in a circular fashion to pick up more product. But TF3 is just wonderful. And although a smaller brush, I think fantastic because you have that stronger body, right, that sits halfway down the brush, but then you have just this lightweight taper that is beautifully soft and just floaty on the skin. If you wanted to refine the blend, if you wanted to smooth out any edges, if you wanted a more hefty application of bronzer or contour here, again, because of this slant, it just goes pat, 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 and the various lens naturally diffuse the product because just pressing it on the skin is going to blend the product because of how the brush is designed. I know, blows your mind. And you could bring the tip to the apples of your cheeks if you decided to apply a blush topper like product, like powder on the apples of your cheeks. You could whisk it away or blend in a circular fashion. And those are the 3. Now, am I selfish and want more? 100%. I think Sonia should make, we have the Fusion face set. Okay, so from a practical standpoint, we already have a foundation brush from Sonia, and that is an exceptional brush, the Jumbo Face, because not only do you have Psycho Ho Goat, but you got the synthetic fibers, Psycho Ho Goat, undyed and dyed, and Kakishibu dyed Psycho Ho Goat bristles can be used with liquids and cream, but Sonia warned you have to be careful depending on the product, because if you need the brush to bend in order to pick up the product and blend it on your skin, that could damage and lessen the life of the brush. So you don't want to use these brushes too frequently with those types of formulas. I'm just not going to do it because I need these to be safe. But if Sonia wanted to make a Kakishibu face brush exclusive more so for liquid and creams or foundation products, sign me up. Perhaps we can get a brush size in between TF1 and TF2, right? Why not? If I were to predict what size she would go with, well, she has 2 fans in her fundamental face set. I'm thinking because she already has 2 round cheek brushes in this collection, maybe she could go more the flat round route. Maybe she would create something like the Hinoki brush, smaller, a little more direct, and not as fluffy as the TF1. Just don't mind me brainstorming these ideas with you guys. And I would love to know what ideas you have down below. What shapes you would like to see from Sonia next, if not from the Kakishibu set perspective, just in general. And that concludes the video, family. Thank you for making it this far. And again, a huge thank you to Sonia G and the Beautylish team for sending this gift. If you would like to know more about the brushes, again, I would highly recommend that you visit Sonia's website, sweetmakeuptemptations.com, as well as her Instagram feed, and the links down below to purchase the brushes are affiliated. So I thank you in advance for you even considering. And if you like this video, if it helped you in any way, please give it a like. Maybe consider subscribing so you can see more of my videos. I will see you here again next time.